Welcome to Markets Plus, where leading experts from across BMO discuss factors shaping the markets, economy, industry sectors, and much more. Visit bmocm.com/markets plus for more episodes.
Darryl White, CEO of BMO Financial Group, kicked off the third annual U.S.-Canada Summit in Toronto with the following remarks.
This conference was originally planned for the spring of 2025. And if you sort of think about what's happened since then in the middle of an election, it would have been pretty interesting to try to decipher what was going on in the U.S.-Canada relationship back then in April. And now we know a little bit more than we did then, but we don't know everything. So I think we're in an extraordinarily important fulcrum point in this relationship. What have we learned in the last 6 months? I think we've learned a lot. We've learned a bit in the last 24 hours. But if I look back 6 months, importantly, very importantly, it is clearer now, it feels obvious now, but it wasn't obvious then, that tariffs, of course, will be used as tools well into the future as part of an ambitious U.S. plan to rewrite global trading rules that have developed over the course of the past century. And while geography isn't necessarily destiny, it is pretty close. So how do we square those 2 points? The math in the moment is clear. Through the first 8 months of this year, two-way trade between Canada and the U.S. has declined by $15 billion compared to that same period of time in 2024. Between the two partners, Canada has the most at stake. Over the next 9 months, Canada, Mexico, and the United States will be reassessing the USMCA treaty. The puts and takes of every trade agreement are easy to criticize in a zero-sum world, but it's undeniable that the certainty underpinning the Canadian-American partnership has enabled massive attraction of investment, of capital, economic growth, and employment for both countries. It has integrated supply chains and industries that are capable of competing with anyone in the world. And along the way, it's helped make North America the most prosperous region on the planet. Well, it's hard to be sure how these trade talks will conclude. We do know that they will determine the future of North American free trade. And it's possible that the demands for change, of the three parties bring to the table something that ultimately strengthens the alliance for all. So let's keep that thought in mind. In this way, the USMCA review process shouldn't be viewed, in my view, in isolation as only a threat. As President Trump noted in a speech early in his first term, America first doesn't mean America alone. And in Canada's case, it's been a good thing, in my opinion, that this external pressure has finally inspired our political and business class to address issues that have been ignored far too long here at home. Lowering interprovincial trade barriers. We cannot let the air come out of that balloon. Investing in productivity-boosting infrastructure. Seriously addressing tax reform, including prioritizing in-year depreciation for capital projects to be level playing field competitive with the U.S. Reducing regulatory burden and making more significant, more sustained, and more effective investment in our national defense capability and our industrial capacity. These are refreshing goals, but it is time for action. The next 10 years are not going to look like the last 10 years. Suggesting that we can simply click auto-renew on these agreements is not reading how the room has changed. The political status quo has changed, and trade policy underpinning it needs to keep up. And despite the big shifts everywhere in the world competing for our attention, as North Americans in this room, we can't take our eye off the ball here at home. We've got to keep the momentum on renewing the most important trade pact the world has ever seen. Why do I say that? It may not get the global headlines given everything else that's going on in the world, but it's important to ground ourselves here as we set the day out on some data. The USMCA governs a market of more than 500 million people, accounting for nearly 30% of global GDP. Now, drilling down on Canada from a U.S. perspective, Canada welcomed about $350 billion in U.S. exports last year. Context is important. After Mexico, The next two largest U.S. export markets, China and the U.K., together accounted for $223 billion. So Canada is 1.5 times the customer to the United States that China and the UK are combined. Two-way merchandise trade between Canada and the US was more than $760 billion last year, behind only Mexico. Where are China and Japan? That same trade figure with China was $582 billion, followed by Japan, $227. Canada, $762, Japan, $227. Why is this important? Because there's a lot going on in the world, and at the same time, the most consequential economic decisions for Canadian and American prosperity are those made about the 49th parallel. Of course, we appreciate that there is also a third party in the USMCA with Mexico. But 3 years ago, when we and our friends and partners at Eurasia Group set to take on these discussions, we came to the conclusion that there was no event anywhere like this one where we brought together government officials, investors, and business people in the same place to tackle this relationship between Canada and the United States. So it is an opportunity to dig deep into those relationships and work on the progress that the company I work for has been working on since we first opened our office in New York in 1818. Now, there's no doubt that this is an intense period between Team USA and Team Canada. Here at BMO and in Toronto, we have some familiarity with a cross-border rivalry. We have two very familiar sports teams, one from Canada's biggest city up against a coastal powerhouse. One side, a scrappy club from the north looking to prove itself against a roster stacked with global superstars and big city swagger, squaring off in a sport beloved the world over with big consequences for the postseason. Of course, I'm talking about the match at BMO Stadium in Los Angeles tonight, featuring Toronto FC against LAFC. We all know that sports is a great unifier, except for the Ryder Cup. But we also know that we can learn a lot from rivalries. Today, here's the deal. While Team Canada and Team USA do compete fiercely, we're all best served when we optimize the strength of Team North America in the global competition that we're facing. We are undoubtedly stronger together, and we are all here, you all came here to join us to fight for that. We can't lose sight of that in the months that are ahead.
Thanks for listening. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. For more episodes, visit bmocm.com/marketsplus.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and may not necessarily represent those of BMO Capital Markets, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.